Thank you so much for joining us today. We have Commissioner Geoffrey Starks. He is a commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission, believes that communications technology has the potential to be one of the most powerful forces on earth for promoting equality and opportunity. Because high quality broadband is essential to participating in our economy and society, Commissioner Starks has been a champion for the millions of Americans who lack access to or cannot afford a home internet connection. Bringing a wealth of enforcement experience to the Commission, Commissioner Starks advocates for consumer protection and accountability, particularly in managing the USF, the Universal Service Fund at the Federal Communications Commission. Commissioner Starks is also a leader on national security policy, working to eliminate untrustworthy equipment from America's communications networks. His Find It, Fix It, Fund It initiative brought national attention to the urgent need to support small and rural companies as they work to make their networks more secure. Before he entered federal public service, Commissioner Starks practiced law at Williams and Connolly, clerked on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit, served as a legislative staffer in the Illinois State Senate, and worked as a financial analyst. Commissioner Starks graduated from Harvard College with high honors and Yale Law School. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Starks, who will first make introductory remarks, and then we'll go into some questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Angie, for that generous introduction. And of course, congratulations to you, the INCOMPAS team, to Chip as well for successfully bringing this event online. I know it's been a challenging year for you, for your members, for all of us. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what I'm doing, my vision for digital equity, conversation to come with Angie, and truly some of the most important issues facing us at the Commission. The FCC's top priority must be connecting all Americans to modern high-speed communication networks. And I don't need to tell you, especially those of you who are working every day to connect your communities, that even the most basic internet access has not reached all Americans. Broadband is the essential tool of our digital world, something everyone needs in order to get a job, to do their homework, to pay their bills, and accomplish all the tasks that we all take for granted online. And we have not finished the work of getting that access to all Americans. It's been 25 years, of course, since the phrase digital divide was first introduced. Clearly, we are not talking about a short-term condition. And low-income folks, people of color, people in rural areas either aren't getting connected online or are making great sacrifices in order to get connected. And so that means driving to that library in order to fill out that job application, joining the wait list for a Wi-Fi hotspot. It can also mean that when so much debate in education and community building are happening online, important perspectives are being left out. And so solving this problem was always a moral imperative. And the COVID-19 pandemic has raised the stakes. When this first hit, I called for a connectivity stimulus in order to increase access to broadband by our providers and expanding the Lifeline program, funding the purchase and distribution of mobile hotspots by schools and libraries, opening up new spectrum bands on a temporary basis as needed, and encouraging broadband service providers to waive data caps, increase and expand affordable offerings over the last 6 months and going. Some of these proposals have been adopted, others have not, but almost all with the help of INCOMPAS members. Much remains to be done. INCOMPAS and many other organizations have called on Congress to provide emergency broadband funding through the COVID crisis, and I agree. I also think the FCC should act now. We should start by addressing the Lifeline program designed to connect the most vulnerable Americans. And at a time when so many need Lifeline's benefits, fewer than 20% of eligible households do participate in the program. And I also think its current benefits need to meet the moment. We should update those E-rate rules to help encourage our students, more than 15 million who lack broadband at home and the devices to use it. Earlier this month, Colorado Attorney General petitioned the FCC to waive its E-rate rules to permit schools and libraries to offer broadband connections, including hotspots, to their students. I've called for similar actions for months. We should grant that petition immediately. More broadly, we need to tackle our country's long-term broadband affordability problem. And in recent months, the FCC has focused much of its broadband deployment on rural areas, rightfully so. Connecting rural areas is important, but it doesn't solve the whole problem. Census Bureau surveys show that 3 times as many households live in urban areas that remain unconnected as in rural areas. And Black and brown households are disproportionately less likely to have fixed broadband connection than their white counterparts. I recently published an op-ed with civil rights leaders that highlighted the need for bold and expansive action that will enact inclusive connectivity policies that center on our communities of color. And so that means fixing our broadband data, promoting competition, and requiring USF auction winners to provide an affordable option. On a related note, just last week, I recently announced that I have established the Early Career Staff Diversity Initiative alongside with Chairman Pai. Our goal is to create inclusive policies that promote the interests of all Americans, and that's why we need to hear from a variety of perspectives and folks from all backgrounds. Through this initiative, the Commission will offer a select number of paid internships to those who otherwise might be financially unable to participate in unpaid roles. And we will increase our recruitment of students from HBCUs, minority serving institutions, and affinity groups such as the National Black Law Students Association for all of our career early programs. It's time for our policies and people advocating for them to reflect America. And with that, I look forward to continuing to work with INCOMPAS and all of its members on these priorities. Thank you again for the chance to address you for just a few moments. Angie, back to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. You have covered a lot of ground there. And we're going to get to policy, but first, I got to make it a little personal. I think I'm from the South. I want to hear, how are you doing? We've been doing this for 7 months, working from home. I know you have small kids. How are you managing it to work? I know your wife works full time. Give us a little bit about how you're doing during all of this COVID.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for starting with the personal, Angie. Like millions of Americans have young children at home. And in particular as well, have an early learner. And so that student is in school virtually. And so it really is bringing home quite clearly what it means to have education being moved to a virtual digital space and how important that is. And so don't mishear me though. We are blessed. Everybody's doing well. And we've had an extremely busy summer and still trying to balance a lot of those work and life issues. That balance is hard even when there wasn't a pandemic. And obviously now it's been pressure tested here for a lot of us. I know you have a working household with learners as well. And so we are like millions of Americans where we're holding on and doing our best. And so look forward to those continuing.
I'm really glad to hear that. And I know that it feeds right into all the work that you do every single day at the FCC, which is making sure that people can get connected, stay connected. So tell me a little bit about how your own personal experience and your wife's experience at home has now influenced the work that you're doing at the FCC on broadband connectivity and affordability.
I think that's exactly right. And the past few months have seared and strengthened the view, and my view, that solving internet inequality, those who have and those who don't have the internet, has never been more critical, more vital, more important. And as I said, in my opening, the COVID-19 has laid bare that already cruel reality of that digital divide. I've also taken some good note. The protests for racial justice that have happened over the last couple months across the country have started not only just a moment, but a movement, and demonstrated how the internet is critical to the spread of ideas, to understanding, to information, for organizing around national issues. And so in countless ways, the historic failure that we've had to close that digital divide has had a devastating impact on so many Americans, including in particular communities of color, rural and urban. And the coming months and years are only going to magnify that. And so, as I mentioned, in particular, communities of color by a wide margin significantly are less likely to have a home broadband connection than their counterparts. And so the pandemic has changed these fundamentals. Sheltering in place, closing of public spaces have foreclosed visiting that Wi-Fi. And so classrooms, workplaces, the economy are all being powered in virtual settings. And so we've got to do more to make it ubiquitous and connect all Americans.
Well, we really appreciate your call for the immediate needs due to COVID. And you talked about the need for emergency broadband funding so that people can afford it, emergency broadband funding so we can get that connectivity to those who don't physically have the network access yet. That's also just very critical. And then the companies that have been serving and building also needing some certainty that where they've kept the networks going and kept the lights on for their consumers and small businesses, even when they couldn't pay their bills, that they've got a safety net just in case, right? So thank you for all of that really hard work. I know none of this is easy, and I know there's only a portion of this that the FCC can affect. A lot of this needs to come from Congress. We're all waiting with a bated breath. Will we get a next round of COVID relief?
Yeah.
Right? By the way, have you heard anything about that? What's the latest that you're hearing? We're keeping our fingers crossed, and of course, we're encouraging both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It is one of these things where, I have been involved in some of these ongoing discussions, obviously with legislators that seek out my thinking as well. And we obviously have an oversight hearing that is coming up on the 17th. And so it has never been more critical to connect Americans. And so I am hopeful, bated breath as well, that something ultimately gets worked out, because the fact of the matter is that everyday Americans really need it.
Yeah. So let's focus just a little bit on network infrastructure and what it takes to make that investment in the broadband network infrastructure. That first step, though, is where does it exist? Where does it not exist? I know that you've done a lot of work on the mapping. Give us your perspective on what the commission needs to be doing on broadband mapping, as well as the investment in those areas that need the additional federal support. You have the high cost USF fund, the RDOF. Tell us what your plan would be and what you're recommending as you're working with the other commissioners on these issues.
Yeah, I think all of that, like you said, these are heavily and complex issues. Looking back during the COVID era here, we have waived some rules, we have pushed some deadlines, we've made Lifeline enrollment easier, and industry, like you said, and most pointedly, needs a strong pat on the back. They made important voluntary contributions to their communities, and so I know the Keep America Connected pledge was not easy. And so I applaud a lot of those efforts. But now that we're starting to really see and start to understand how long and severe this crisis is going to be, it's clear that we still do need more. More needs to be done. And so individual companies can't shoulder this burden alone, just like we talked about. We certainly need some legislation. I've publicly said I thought the passage of the HEROES Act was a step in the right direction. But to your point, the FCC also needs to focus on what it can do. And so, again, it's been frustrating to watch some of the big ideas that I think could help Americans during this crisis. E-rate, for example, needs to expand and meet the moment. And so I am convinced in looking at the law, looking at our rules and what we could do, that the FCC could serve students in whatever classroom that they're in. And so right now that might be a kitchen table or a living room. And so the FCC needs to look at its rules, waive its rules that prohibit what is a narrow, constrained definition of off-campus use of E-rate funds, and really start meeting children and families where they are.
And our member companies, almost every one of our network member companies is currently serving schools and libraries through the program.
Yeah.
And the demand, the pent-up demand, both for service at home for those students whose parents, families, grandparents who are raising them can't afford the connectivity, as well as the devices that are needed to provide that connectivity. And you're right, the providers, I think they've taken on a lot and they're willing to do a lot, but they can't just give it away for free. Right? That's not a realistic solution to this issue.
Yeah.
And I think that the work that you're doing to bring more light to the current constraints, I think is helpful, having your voice, making sure that the public understands it, but also that Congress understands it, and that they prioritize, the fixes, and finish it as quickly as possible, because the needs are right now, and it doesn't look as though we're going to be coming out of this COVID situation in the really near future, right? This is looking to at least into winter, perhaps even into the spring, and maybe we'll finish the school year out. With many of the children having to school at home. So thank you for that work. It is just absolutely critical. One of the other things that we've been talking to our member companies about most recently is how, as things are quieter in terms of folks on the streets and commuting back and forth to their offices, it's a great time to deploy network. Because shutting down sidewalks and shutting down streets to do deployments can oftentimes be very disruptive, right? For the community. And in fact, I've lived not too far away from a major construction project going on here in the Washington metro area. They are building the Purple Line, which is going to be a new high-speed rail system that will connect with Metro just a couple blocks from me. And the workers are really taking advantage of the fact that the traffic is lower, and there's a lot of work on the streets. So we have been talking to our member companies about the deployments that they're doing, and it's been a really important time frame for them to move quickly. And we spend quite a bit of our time talking about how more of the processes can be streamlined, so that when the streets are being dug up, there's extra conduits going in, so it's easier to string fiber through it. And also, what can be done to increase access to poles and other kinds of facilities and rights-of-way that are needed. And I know that the commission's work, oftentimes people are like, oh, seriously, we have to talk about pole attachments again? But yet it's critical, right? These are critical elements of deploying the network. Any thoughts you may have for our membership on what more could be done, or that we could do to try to bring more light to the issue, the physical infrastructure issues?
Yeah, it's a critical question, I've heard from many of INCOMPAS's members, about, how the commission's unbundling and resale rules help them get and start and enter new markets. And so these are also often highly technical, challenging issues. And so I applaud, by reference here, INCOMPAS and US Telecom for coming together, finding that compromise on many of the outstanding issues. I wanted to make sure I gave you guys a strong kudos for that. And so, coming to the issue that we have long been talking about, and we all know that we need to right-size the infrastructure, the need for us to continue the build-out. And so the more responsive that the needs are of state and local governments, the better that collaboration is the more I think things will become easier and will gel a little bit. And so this is an issue that is part of a give and take. And so like anything else where you're talking about working relationships, making sure that the state and local governments that are on the front lines of responding to COVID-19 and the pandemic, but then also making sure that we consider some of the other burdens and making sure that they right-size their processes as well. We need a strong collaboration of state and local governments and providers working together. And so I think additional ways, as we all consider them in streamlining deployment, I think looking to strengthen those ties and those intergovernmental partnerships is going to be a critical aspect.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've been working to put together some streamlining deployment language for Congress and others to be looking at, thinking through. One element of that is how we ensure that localities who maybe just aren't as familiar with the steps that need to be taken have the educational resources as well as potentially financial resources as they have more permit applications showing up in their offices, right? And so those are the kinds of ideas that we've been presenting. So it's directly in line with what you're suggesting too.
Good.
Hearing more from us on this. We have a paper that's coming out next week, right after the show, that's going to talk about some of the principles that are needed to ensure deployment, ensure the funding is there, and how policymakers should be looking at this in very much a holistic way, completely based on the fact of how much broadband is needed for every sector of the economy. And that's shown definitively during COVID. We talked about this prior to COVID, right? But now we feel like we have the test case in reality where we're all seeing how much high-speed broadband network is needed in every single home, every single small business, so that we can meet all of the needs and the economic needs of our nation, no matter what industry sector it is.
Yeah.
So you had, in your introductory remarks, also talked about online availability of services, goods, the opportunity for people to come together and freely express themselves, the movements that we've seen. You referenced as many ways how heartbreaking the summer has been from the perspective of civil rights and justice, but also how the online networks allow for people to have their voices heard.
Yes.
Allow for groups to come together and organize for good, right?
Yeah.
And we really do appreciate the perspective that you've provided us, your support on net neutrality, the ability for consumers to not only have availability of internet on affordable prices, but be able to express themselves and not have their ISP, prevent them from being able to express themselves when they're doing so in a lawful manner, right? So we really do appreciate all that. But recently, the Commission's been presented with a really interesting petition by the administration.
Yes.
That is looking at a particular provision of the Communications Act, Section 230, which provides, a balanced opportunity for online companies to be able to allow third parties and to be heard, use their platforms to speak, but then also gives them some liability protection when perhaps people are saying things that not everyone would agree with, right? So it's really interesting. The FCC has never played a role in Section 230. And I will confess, Commissioner, I think you know that I've spent most of my career practicing either before the Federal Communications Commission or at the Federal Communications Commission, and never worked on Section 230. But recently, NTIA filed this petition for rulemaking at the FCC, asking the FCC for the first time, 26 years after Section 230 was passed by a bipartisan Congress and signed by President Bill Clinton, to interpret it and create rules around it. You've already spoken out about 230 and other fora, but I really wanted our audience to hear your perspective on Section 230. What is the Commission's role here? What are your thoughts about this petition? If you wouldn't mind sharing with us.
Well, you know what, I really like the framing that you set up there, because I agree that the best thing the FCC can do and should be doing is enabling content and services to be delivered to consumers and make sure that everyone does have access. And so millions of Americans that don't have that reliable access, we know that they're not able to take advantage of these online debates, and communities are missing these important voices. And so it does redound to the point that I keep driving home, that we need to make high quality, affordable broadband available to everyone. And our online ecosystem, our country, our democracy, all of it will be more vibrant as it better reflects the diversity of our country. And so, as you mentioned, I do support that strong, enforceable network neutrality rules. And at its best, the internet is a democratizing, empowering force driven by the content choices of individual users. And so ISPs shouldn't be those gatekeepers to content. And so I disagree with the course that the chairman and the Republican majority has veered off into on the issue of net neutrality. But one thing I think we absolutely shouldn't do is adopt the content moderation rules under Section 230 that the president, through his executive order in May, requested, and that NTIA has filed a petition for. I think it clearly will draw us into the regulation of content moderation. I don't think NTIA has made the case that Congress wanted the FCC to do this, and what NTIA is asking us for. And frankly, the NTIA proposal would effectively rewrite the statute, and something that I think Congress can only do. And there's a frothy debate in Congress, obviously, right now about what Section 230 should mean, and potential paths forward there. And so I don't think the FCC, I think we should reject NTIA's proposal and stay out of this. And that should be the proper place for this discussion.
Well, we appreciate that perspective. INCOMPAS has been participating in the proceeding, and I think we're closely aligned with you on that perspective, and appreciate your full consideration of the issue, even though it hasn't technically, there's no order that or no NPRM being asked at this point. I think it is really fantastic, though, that you and your staff are able, as I know you're small staff, that you're able—
Small but mighty, small but mighty.
Mighty, right, that you're able to kind of keep your eye on all the things that are going on the commission, and continuing to have your voice and your perspective on this is really, really important. I do have one final question for you, and I'm not going to ask you to predict the future. I know everybody is waiting with a bated breath. What will happen in the November election, and how quickly will we know who the next president of the United States will be? But I think, though, everybody's starting to talk about 2021, no matter who is the next president, potentially the next chair of the FCC. I mean, obviously, you have a perspective already on the FCC's work, but how do you see 2021 playing out for the FCC in terms of what its priorities should be?
Yeah.
What's going on now and the future that we need to be looking and working towards?
Yeah, it's a great question. Two things come to mind. The first, I think I'm going to continue to beat that drum, that I think, affordability and getting more ubiquitous access has got to be our number one priority. It should have been digital divide and issues of internet inequality should have been something that we have had our eye on the ball on. And it is even more imperative right now that we fully solve this issue. And so I think affordability is one of the critical pieces that we have not done enough on that issue. We have over 50+ million Americans who are either unemployed or filed for unemployment assistance. And there are a lot of Americans out there that are hurting. And we know that even prior to the pandemic, there were over 18 million Americans who simply do not have a home broadband connection because it's too expensive. And so making sure that we have an affordable option, I think is going to be something that we have got to take care of moving forward. You know, the other thing, the second point that I would mention, and you mentioned it back in my bio, we haven't hit on it today, but, you know, focusing on security and network security. I think there's a broad range of issues and stakeholders that I've been working with. The process of replacing Huawei and ZTE equipment in our networks, I think, is something that's going to have to continue to unfold. Congress has recognized the need to fund those replacements, hasn't appropriated the money quite yet. You know, but the FCC has disallowed the use of USF funds for the maintenance upkeep of Huawei ZTE equipment. And so there is some urgency there. I think the concept of Open RAN is something that a lot of folks are starting to think about. I'm starting to think about that as well. But more holistically, I think the issue of making sure that we have as secure networks as possible is going to be something that I'm going to continue to focus on. I think it should be a high priority going forward.
Well, thank you. Commissioner, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time
Thank you.
with me this afternoon for the benefit of our audience. While we would have loved to have had you in Vegas, the good news is that, you know, we only had to travel just a few feet from
That is true. We will hope and pray for the following year at Vegas. And so thank you for the conversation. Keep up all the hard work on behalf of INCOMPAS and for your members, and be safe, be well.
Thank you.